Well, I want to share with you not a sad parable, but a sifting parable, one that Jesus taught. And to do that, I want to use an image that's a little unorthodox, but I want you to look at this image, and I want you to think about, what do you see? What does this series of squares and rectangles, these blocks, what do you see? Well, for our purposes, I want to show you the next slide and say, I pray that what you see here is the real estate of the heart. That each of those blocks represent places that you can be invested in your heart. Parts of your heart that you literally give over to something. If you look at it the next way, you'll see that Jesus spoke to this directly in Matthew 13, 44 through 46, and he talked about a treasure. And he said that where your treasure is, that's where your heart really is. And so the parable is designed to ask us, what is your treasure? What owns your heart? What are you invested in such a way that nobody else can see? Where are your treasures? What is your treasure? And here's the thing, as Jesus is telling this story and sharing the parable, he talks about a man who comes up to this field and he finds this treasure. And he sees in that treasure something worth everything he has. And he says to his friends, listen, I'm liquidating everything because I want to buy that portion of land. I'm going to buy that plot to get that treasure. And he makes it absolutely clear that nothing else is going to interfere. And I want to ask you, have you come to a place where you have identified the treasure of your heart? And do you have it in such a place that you're willing to be gone, be rid of, to literally live without everything else? This is what that would look like. If your heart was filled with all these other possibilities, are you willing to say, as Jesus taught, that this treasure is enough? I'm willing to do without everything else if I have Him. And that's the point. Jesus is teaching. He's the treasure. A life with Him is the treasure. Living out His call is yours and my treasure. Are we willing to liquidate everything and follow Him? Now, no doubt some are going to say, well, that's over the top. That's not necessary. Well, this is the very point that Jesus is making. This is the message of the gospel. He's calling us to an understanding that says this is the message of the faith. I ask you to be holy and to hold on to not just this message, but this Messiah. Is He worth that to you? I pray that He is. Because you see, friends, you and I, we derive our pleasure from our treasure. We derive our pleasures from our treasures. And if you're honest, you'd be willing to admit that we hold on to and we protect what we really treasure. Think about it this way. If I were to give you a fistful of pennies and a fistful of $100 bills, and you had both in your hands, and then I said to you, excuse me, I need your help, and one of your hands is required, which one are you going to let go of? The truth of the matter is you'll let go of the pennies, and it makes perfect sense. Why? Because they're literally worth 1/1000th of the $100 bills. Stated in another way, the $100 bills are worth 1,000 times more the pennies. So, of course, you would drop the pennies and you would hold on to and you would protect those $100 bills. No doubt. Well, here's the thing. In today's world and in much of the church world, when we talk about Christ as the treasure, there are people who claim to be His who would say He's not really $100 bills. I mean, $10, yeah. He's a fistful of tens, I'll give you that. And as if that weren't bad enough, the reality is they would say the world is not a fistful of pennies, but it's at least a fistful of $10 bills. And it's kind of this tough tug of war. And the reality is many would say, well, the world is filled with $20 bills. And that's why the world wins out over and over and over again. Because there isn't really a treasuring of Christ. What you and I have to be honest about is if these preferences don't change, then these people won't change. That's at the heart of where your delight is, your decisions will follow. That's the point. Let me take you back to this image where we see just the treasure in the heart. Everything else is gone. Well, that's counterintuitive to your flesh. And sadly, it's counter to what the church culture of our day is demonstrating. Now, let me show you the next option. And this is where we see Mark 8:36 being lived out. These are the folks who say, listen, I don't want your little treasure. I want the rest of what's left. I'll live with not having your little plot of land where you say that treasure is, because look, I have the potential of everything else. And it's Jesus' teaching in Mark 8:36 that says, what a sad state of affairs when you're willing to give up your soul in your pursuit of the world. Now, why is that such a big deal? I'll show you the next image, which is the American dream. This is why it's such a big deal. Because in our context, the American dream says, hey, listen, good news. You can have your treasure and your trophies. You can have both and all the potential of the world there as well. Look, you can have your idols, your trophies and Jesus. Now, as if that weren't bad enough, that's not only the American dream. Let me show you the cultural church's compromise with the American dream. This is what it looks like. The cultural church comes along and says, hey, listen, the American dream and all that gluttony, no, that's not good. But I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll make a middle road. We'll make this new way where you can have your trophies and your treasure. You just got to give up all the rest of that stuff. See, isn't this a great middle road? In essence, you can have your own American dream, which, by the way, I refer to as a spiritual nightmare. But it's not bad enough that the cultural church is championing this compromise, which Acts 20:30 tells us in part to watch out for. But look at what happens next, because here you'll see the cultural church's lie. And this is what 2 Timothy 4:3 warns us to. Beware those who tell you what your itching ears want to hear. You see, this is the cheap grace crowd that will come along and say, look, you can have them both, 50-50. Remember my analogy? $10 bill and $10 bill. Look, they work together. They're fine. They're exactly the same, and they're connected, or they're so closely connected. You can balance these two. Look at how naturally they would balance. Don't listen to those party poopers like Pastor Jeff. No. Come on, you can have them both. Well, friend, let me show you why I'm not a party pooper. I'm a party planner. Here's the truth and love of the gospel. Look at this next image. Here you see Colossians 3:2 in action. Because of this reality, the trophies of the world and the treasure of heaven are not alike, and they're not side by side. They're eternally separated. The treasure is in heaven. His name is Jesus. The trophies and the idols, they will take you to hell. They are distractions, and they are of the enemy. We're told not to have anything to do with those things that will take us and distract us down into the trophies and away from the treasure. In fact, let me show you the next image where now it becomes a little more graphic. Because you see, it's not just about heaven and hell, it's about the path. And Christ says, he commands that you have to make a choice. Are you going to go down the broad way towards the trophies and idols? Or will you go up the narrow path to the treasure? In fact, if you look at the next image, this is what Jesus teaches as he comes to the end of the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7. Verses 13 through 15. And he says, look, you can't balance these two. You're either going one way or the other. And he teaches specifically so that those that are doing the work of the devil and trying to create compromise and rationalizing, Jesus said, you've got to understand there's only two ways. There's not a middle road. And my prayer is that you'll come to recognize that the treasure is not only worth it, it's the only place and way that you'll ever find the blessing of God. It's the only way and place. Now, here's where I want to get personal again, and here comes the exhortation. Note this, it's not condemnation, it's exhortation. My question is this: what kind of return on investment is our Lord getting from the treasure he has invested in you? Okay, we're no longer talking about are you pursuing the trophies or the treasure. We're going to assume that you've given your life over to the pursuit of the treasure, that Jesus has captured your heart. My question now is, if you are one who wants the treasure, you're invested in the treasure, the question now is, what kind of ROI, what kind of return on investment is our Lord getting for the treasure he's invested in you? Remember, he died that you could live. The only reason you can be holy is because he's given you his holiness. He traded our sin for his righteousness. He's called us to be holy and to hold on no matter what. I simply ask the question, what kind of return on investment is the treasure giver getting with what he's given to you, Christian?